So we're looking at authorial messages in Ransom, and you will need to reflect the messages that David Malouf is presenting in his text in your short story. So make sure that you're covering these, that you're aware of what we're looking at. So, all right, your task is going to be to use the page numbers provided on each slide to identify a scene from Ransom which explores each theme. I'd like you to please post those onto your OneNote class notes. So the first one we're looking at is becoming human. So this is the idea that all humans are bound, doesn't matter whether you're a king, whether you're a peasant, whether you're a warrior, whether you're a woman, a man, anything, that all humans are bound together through a fundamental views, values, and emotions. So all of us are capable of extreme rage, are capable of extreme joy, extreme happiness, sadness. All of us are born and will die. That all of us will experience things in our lives that will change us in some way. So we certainly see this in our key characters. The idea here is that personal transformation is inevitable. We all suffer, and we all kind of look to redeem ourselves for past wrongs or things that we've done. At our core, we are all fundamentally the same, and war strips away societal and cultural norms and leaves humans at their most vulnerable. In a state of war, or even now, like in a state of COVID-19, all of us are kind of realizing that there's a lot of things that actually bind us together. There are certain things that make us human. Humanity is dependent on interpersonal relationships. So our relationships give us meaning. They give us purpose in our lives. And there often is a split in people, violence and compassion, vengeance and mercy. So we see these things in our key characters. So have a consideration here of how we see these characters overcome maybe their role or the identity they think they have, and kind of learn that in the end we're all human. Priam learns that in his relationship with Somax. Achilles learns that through his relationship with Priam. And it's an essential theme of Malouf's writing. So I want you to read these pages here, pause now, and then complete how we see becoming human. Just write me a dot point about how we see becoming human in these pages here on your OneNote. So pause now. Okay, next we've got fate and free will. So this is the idea that life is random, and yet there still is an element of control. So we can't kind of control the randomness or the chance that occurs in life, but what we can control is how we respond to that chance. So this is the idea of autonomy, that in the end, we are in control of our own actions and free will. Chance is important. It's something that all of us, everything in life, all of our lives, has an element of chance involved. But we don't just leave things to chance. You know, Priam's not just going to sit there and hope Achilles is going to give his son's body back. Instead, he takes a chance and he goes to seek out Achilles. So he still has, he shows his free will. The destiny or fate exists, but it can be overridden by our decisions. However fixed external events may be, Ransom suggests that humans can rise above their fates by creating moments where internal change is possible. So we're set in the middle of Troy, in the middle of war, and Troy is about to fall. And yet, Priam, the king of Troy, is still able to have this moment of profound internal change and therefore triumph. So you might, if you're setting your story in the middle of a war or in the middle of some kind of crisis, there are things around these characters that they can't change if they're living in war. We're living it during coronavirus. But what can these characters learn from within that, and what can they actually control and change about themselves? So life is a blend of predetermined, so fate, and contingent, free will. Read this page here, these pages here, pause, and please reflect on how we see the themes of fate and free will in these passages. Next theme is relationships. So Throughout Ransom, relationships keep people's lives meaning. So we've got the idea of paternal relationships, father-son, and that they are boundless, and that the role of fatherhood connects all men as equals. So we've got Priam, a king who is a father, Achilles, a great warrior and demigod who is a father, and Somax, a peasant who is a father. And all of them kind of share this idea of being a father. Relationships should be established on deep and connection and understanding. So we certainly see that between Priam and Hecuba, and we see that in Achilles and Patroclus. While relationships can inflict pain and suffering, the benefits are worth the suffering. So we've got a character like Somax, whose entire family, except for his daughter-in-law and his granddaughter, have died. And yet he doesn't regret those relationships. He doesn't wish he'd never had his sons. He says blessed and then unblessed. He looks back with fondness. He had memories and he learnt a lot from them. But there's a price to be paid for those relationships. Because in all likelihood, at some point in our lives, people will die and we'll lose some of those relationships, which will cause pain. But does that mean we don't have relationships? Of course not. Affection for family and friends is a central value in human societies. So again, it's that essential thing that makes us human. Pause here, read these page numbers, and reflect upon how we see relationships throughout this text. Wrath and vengeance. So this is the idea that people are capable of huge fury, and if relationships are an essential element of being human, well, yes, people will become filled with wrath and filled with vengeance when those relationships are taken away from them. So we've got someone like Achilles who is filled by wrath and vengeance. And we're kind of called here not to necessarily judge him harshly, but to sympathize with why he's acting in this way. His vindictiveness and his brutality does not help him. It doesn't bring Patroclus back, and it doesn't make the pain any less. The pain of sadness and guilt isn't alleviated, and it doesn't give him closure. What does give him closure is the relationships that he forms and the humanity that he has, that he shares with Priam. This point here is about the fact that it talks about how people keep avenging people, so the murderous tribalism, that war has produced a war that sets sons against their father's enemies. So we've got Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, who goes to Troy to avenge Achilles and kills Priam. And it's the idea of like the cycle of war. And that the war loses all meaning because you've got sons avenging fathers, avenging fathers, avenging fathers, and eventually they're kind of just killing for the sake of killing. So this is what this means here, the murderous tribalism. And ultimately the irrationality of war, that we kill others to find peace or to bring about a better world, but we're actually destroying it. So again, pause, read these page numbers, and reflect upon how we see wrath and vengeance in the book on your OneNote. Loss and mortality. All humans share the awareness of mortality, and therefore that we should show compassion for one another. So this basically means we all know every single person on the planet is going to die, so we should be kind to one another, and we should share in one another's experiences. We as humans have this like little pinprick of time on the planet, but the world will keep going after we die. So what legacy are we going to leave behind, and what can we do with the time that we've got? People deal with grief and loss in a variety of ways. Compare and contrast the grief and loss of Achilles versus Hecuba versus Priam versus Somax, and we see completely different ways of dealing with that grief. I think we've covered that one. Grief offers valuable learning experiences to individuals and can teach one to be humble. So basically, Priam, through his grief for his son, kind of strips away his kingliness and becomes a man and a father grieving his son. So he's actually becoming humbled by it and learning something. And Achilles eventually does the same. Pain associated with mortality can only be healed through actions of selfless love. So yes, we are all going to die. How do we overcome that? Well, We be selfless and we help others. Pause here, reflect on these page numbers in your OneNote, please. Okay, storytelling is the idea that a big part of being human is sharing and communicating with other people. It provides backstory for one another. It provides messages. Humans have been storytelling for as long as we've had language. Before we even had writing, people were doing cave paintings and telling their stories. So this is about the fact that storytelling allows us to communicate with people in the future, with one another. It makes us look beyond ourself, our space, and our time. So, like right now, we're reading a story about ancient Troy. And this is the point here. By revisiting past stories, we enrich the present and imagine the future. So, ancient Troy is teaching us about the present and allows us to kind of imagine a future where what war can do to people, what it has done to people, and what it could continue to do to people. So pause here, reflect on the role of storytelling in the text. And fluid identities. So this is the fact that as people, we are always changing who we are and who we believe ourselves to be. Identity isn't just stagnant, it's complex, it's conflicting. So we've got Priam, who is a king, a father, and a man. We've got Achilles, who is a warrior, a demigod, a father, a man. We've got Somax, a cart driver, a father, a man. And all of these things are kind of sometimes they can conflict with one another. So we've got people who are attempting to figure out who they are and trying to find themselves kind of in amongst the layers of their role. So in the sample that I gave you, it's about a woman trying to figure out who she is, her identity, now that she's a mother. So you might have a consideration of how one of your characters in your story is changing because of this. Pause here and read these pages and reflect, please. Okay, so now what you're going to do is I want you to consider which themes you'll probably find you're writing on 2, maybe 3 of Malouf's themes in your own story. So I want you to identify them and explain how you're doing it. And then I want you to compare. So I want you to talk about how in your story you're showing the theme of relationships in this way, and then Malouf does it in this way. So actually do an explicit comparison, and then there's an example for you here. So post all of those reflections onto OneNote, please, and email me through any questions that you've got.